All right. Well, again, thank you, Jennifer, so much for being here today and joining us. We're so excited to have you and just to learn a little bit more about what you do, but also hear your talk today, kind of on entrepreneurial thinking and self-advocacy and what that looks like in the workplace. And so just to kick us off, Jennifer has been a faculty member with NC State since 2001. And Jennifer actually works to develop and deliver classroom content, mentors entrepreneur students, and presents at different conferences and innovation entrepreneurial events around the world. And during her years in entrepreneurship education, Jennifer has developed and implemented curriculum for multiple different organizations and is a founding leadership team member of NC State Entrepreneurship, which I'm sure y'all might consistently see in some of the top rankings for entrepreneurship programs, which is awesome. And she's presented her work at different universities throughout the US, as well as across the world: Russia, Denmark, Argentina, Japan, Africa. The list kind of goes on. And so Jennifer's introduction really speaks for itself, but I want to turn the floor over to you, Jennifer, today, just to, if there's anything you want to add for your introduction, and then the floor is all yours. So.
Sure. No, thanks for that amazing introduction. I'm definitely a Wolfpacker for life. So all of my degrees came from NC State, and I've worked here for a while. So I feel like I'm sort of embedded like in the brickyard. To those of you joining us, thanks for being here with us today. Please feel free to ask questions at any time that you'd like throughout the program. You're not going to interrupt me or disrupt me during the talk. So I'm here today to talk to you about two different topics, but I find them in many cases to be heavily related. And one is the idea of self-advocacy for yourself in the workforce. And the other is the idea of entrepreneurial thinking and how it can be applied in a lot of different scenarios, specifically inside of an existing organization. So I do have a couple of slides, although I probably will not leave them up full time. I figure you would rather at least see my face than some slides.
Yes, we sure do.
But to give you sort of an overview of what we're going to be talking about, I think self-advocacy in the workforce really starts with having a clear understanding of what employers need from us, right? So how do we advocate for ourselves if we can't make a case for why our employers should be listening to us? And so I say that to bring up, there's a great resource called the National Association of Colleges and Employers. And they do a lot of work with a couple of different areas. So one of the things that they do is they're out talking to all of these different companies and people who hire college students, recent grads, people who have many years of experience, and they're asking, okay, what is it that you most need in the people that you're hiring? And where are new employees coming in? And there's gaps between what they can do and what you need them to be able to do. And so they're gathering and consolidating all of this information. Then they're taking that information and they're going to universities and educational institutions. And they're saying, here's what we're hearing from employers. Here's where the gaps are. And here are some things that you as educators might want to consider in adapting within your curriculums. I think this is an amazing resource for educators, but it is also an amazing resource for anyone who's out in the workforce, because it gives you some very specific bullet points about what people are looking for. So again, let me share my screen with you. And I have a summary of some of what they do. So if you look on the left-hand side, you will see 8 career competencies that NACCE says are some of the most important things employers are looking for. And over on the right side, you'll see some of the specific bullet points that fall under these career competencies. Now, I've just given you a really brief overview here. I would strongly suggest that as you are planning to be stronger advocates for yourself in the workforce, that you dig into NACCE's website and understand each of these on a more specific level. I think you should be able to go through and say, oh, here's what an employer is looking for. Now, let me think about the things that I can share about myself that will support why I bring this to an organization. And that's going to be one of my call outs for you, right? I always like to leave people with something that they can do to follow up and apply the material that we're doing. So think about some examples that you can share to highlight the work that you have already done. I think it's a great idea to always have some examples on hand to talk about because you never know when you're going to be in a position where you have the opportunity to advocate for yourself. I think the next thing to really understand, at least in my experience about self-advocacy, is that it is not something that happens at a single point in time. Self-advocacy is something that you plan for and you prepare for and you do over an extended period of time. It is a long-term strategy. It is not a short time or a one-time tactic. And part of that long-term self-advocacy strategy is building your brand as a contributor. So I would encourage all of you to be thinking right now, like, what brand have you built for yourself as a contributor to an organization? And then I would suggest that you also be thinking about not only what brand have you built, but what brand would you like to build moving forward? Because quite often when we really sit down and start to devote some time and attention to it, we find out that those are two different answers. The brand that we've currently built and the brand that we would like to build might not be completely in alignment. So there's a quote that has always stuck with me in thinking about brands, and it's that your brand isn't what you say it is, it's what they say it is. So when you think about a personal brand, you can think all day long, this is the brand that I really wanted to build. This is the brand that I hope I've built. But if it's not the brand that other people associate with you, it's not your brand, no matter how much you want it to be. So part of this long-term self-advocacy strategy is constantly monitoring what your brand is, talking to people that you work with, talking to people that you report to, talking to people that may report directly to you about what do they think your strengths are? What do they think are some areas for improvement? All of that goes into this brand that you are creating. So another call out that I would offer up to all of you as a way to apply this is to think of 3 words that you would like for people to associate with you in terms of the brand that you are building in the workforce. That's a good starting point to think about all of your actions. What are you doing to support building a brand that will allow people to associate those 3 words with you? And what are the things that you're doing that might not be supporting that brand? And how might you want to change them? Now, part of brand development in this long-term self-advocacy strategy involves 2 different ways of thinking about your brand. Active brand development versus passive brand development. Right? So at this point in our careers, we have all built a brand for ourselves. Whether we have done it intentionally or not is a different story. So active brand development are the things that we are consciously doing, the things that we have planned to do to build this brand for ourselves. Passive brand development are the things that we're doing that we might not have realized are impacting our brand, but they are. And so starting to break down what are we intentionally doing and how is that impacting us versus what might we have been unintentionally doing that has had an impact on us, but we maybe haven't recognized it quite yet. And what does that mean for the brand we've created? What does that mean for the brand that we want to create moving forward? And really, all of this long-term strategy is about building trust in your brand. Over time, you want to build up trust in the brand that you are creating so that every opportunity you have to advocate for yourself, you can say, here are the things that I have done, here are the things that people know about me, and here's why you really need to pay attention for whatever it is that I am advocating for at this moment. So another call out is it's a 2-parter. One is to think of something and write it down that you have actively done to build your brand. And the second part is to list something and write it down somewhere that you have done that has passively helped build your brand. Okay? And if you can start thinking about all of your actions in those terms, I think it really helps put things in perspective, and it helps you make, strong choices about should you do this or should you not do this? How do you prioritize things throughout your day? And it's just been a really helpful guiding tool for me. So a couple of other things to think about with self-advocacy. Set yourself up for success and always be prepared to step up, whether that is stepping up to learn something new, stepping up to take on a new role or responsibility, or stepping up just to share and self-advocate for the things that you have already done and accomplished, or the things that you need in your job to be successful. So some things that you can think about: volunteer for a project. If there's something going on within your organization that is interesting to you, maybe volunteer to participate in some way and be able to explain why do you want to participate and what skills are you hoping to gain and what can you bring to the team. So it's not just about, hey, let me participate. It's advocating for yourself why you would be a good fit. Why is this a good idea? And in addition to just volunteering for a project, offer to help somebody else with their projects, right? You don't have to be actively participating in a project to help build your brand and to help other people see you as a really good support network. So if you know somebody in your office is working on a project and you see a resource that might be helpful for them, by all means, go share it with them. Ask them to tell you about their project. If you have an idea and you're comfortable sharing it, absolutely share it with them in a way that is supportive and a way that is helpful. Like, another part of self-advocacy is being confident enough to speak up when something's wrong. Whether that's you see something going on that is wrong, whether you see a mistake that is about to be made in a project, whether you see just something has been misinterpreted. Finding ways to speak up in a way that is respectful, but that is definitive, right? Can be really important for self-advocacy. I think another part of self-advocacy is proving why people need you to be a part of their organization before you ask for any type of special considerations. Okay, unless this is related to some type of employee right or protection, right? So let's make sure that we're separating those two categories out. If you're going in and advocating that you need special considerations because you need a flexible work schedule, okay, that's one thing, but be ready to show why they should help accommodate you in those areas, what value you're bringing to the organization, and why they need to work with you to keep you a part of the team. Now, it's a completely different story if you are new to an organization and you have a disability that you need for your employer to know about and to support you in. That's a little bit of a different strategy and tactic. It is still important for you to speak up and advocate for yourself and be ready to show how you are going to work with the employer to overcome any obstacles or challenges and be a productive employee. The next thing I want to mention is building authentic relationships that are mutually beneficial as part of your self-advocacy strategy. Mentoring relationships, a lot of times I get people who say, well, how is a mentoring relationship mutually beneficial? And I think there are a lot of ways that it's mutually beneficial, and it's just one example. So every time you're trying to build a relationship with somebody, really think about what is it that you want to get from the relationship, and what is it that you can give to the relationship? How are you going to help benefit the other parties that are involved? If you can start to create these mutually beneficial relationships, you're going to build your brand as a collaborator, as somebody who wants to learn, wants to participate, wants to grow, wants to partner. And all of these things grow into building your brand that supports your ability to self-advocate. Also, understand your value to the company. Like, really sit down and think about what value you bring and how you bring that value. And then have some very specific examples that you can share at any point in time to show how you bring that value. It's one thing to say, hey, trust me, I'm a really important member of this team. It is another thing to say, I'm a really important member of this team. Here's why. Here's how, and here are some very specific examples of what I have done to prove that to everyone. Like another part of self-advocacy is speaking up about your accomplishments, but also speaking up about the accomplishments of others, right? A lot of people are nervous speaking up about the things that they've done. They don't want to come across as bragging. And that, I mean, that's a valid concern. You want to speak up about the positive things that you've done in a way that makes sense for you and that you're comfortable with. But when you also speak up about others' accomplishments, it kind of spreads the wealth a little bit. And it's not always pulling the focus onto you, it's pulling the focus onto anything that people have done well and accomplished. It also encourages others around you to speak up about your accomplishments. Okay. Now, I do have to say, take this with a grain of salt. If you get in an environment where you're the only one speaking up about everybody else's accomplishments and nobody else wants to speak up about yours, you might need to adjust your strategy, right? There is no one strategy that's going to work in every single organization for every single scenario. What I'm talking to you about today are just some high level best practices that have been very relevant over my particular career. And if you have any questions about any of that, I'm happy to go into more detail on my own personal experiences if you'd like to hear about them. Also, I think considering multiple perspectives when you're advocating for yourself. Instead of only thinking about what do you need and why do you need it, think about what the organization needs and why they need it from you. And you can phrase your self-advocacy in ways that address, why is this important to somebody else on the team or to the organization or to your boss or to the people that you work with. So it's not always going to be just about you, it's what do others need from you as well. I think when you do have a problem or you spot a challenge and you need to bring it up and advocate for something, I think it's important to remember, don't always just bring up the challenge, but also offer up some viable solutions as well. Okay. If you need to advocate for yourself and all you're talking about is the problems and saying, here, solve all of these problems for me, that's not always delivering the message that is going to best support our strategy for self-advocacy. But if we go in and say, here are the challenges and here are some recommendations that I have for how we might be able to work through these things, now you're saying, I want to be an active participant in this relationship. And it can sometimes help you get further and faster. I think understanding your limits as well is really important to the self-advocacy strategy. Oftentimes you're going to get into a situation where you do need to advocate for yourself, but others are just not going to listen. And so I think having a prior grasp on what it is that you're willing to accept and where your boundaries are, what is it that you are not willing to accept, and when is it that you're going to be comfortable walking away, are really good things to keep in mind. It's a whole lot easier to advocate for yourself if you understand at what point it is time for you to step away and find something else that's going to be a better fit for you. And as always, absolutely know your rights as an employee. Know what is expected of you. Know how you're going to be reviewed. Read your employment contracts. It is shocking to me how often people don't read their employment contracts, but they are really important. They're important guidelines for everything about your job. And if you are going to advocate for yourself, you need to know what is expected of you. You need to know and understand what your rights are. You need to understand all of that before you jump in to self-advocacy. And the last thing that I'll leave you with on this topic before we shift gears just a little bit is to remember, when you are advocating for yourself, a lot of people automatically go to things like raises or promotions, titles, pay. You can advocate to grow in a lot of different ways, right? Maybe it's that you need a flexible schedule for some reason. You can advocate for having more flexibility. Maybe it's you would like some additional training. Maybe it's that you would like some additional mentoring. Maybe it's you would like some extra vacation days, and got to be able to provide a reason why you've earned it, why you deserve it, and why they should want to work with you on this. But understand that self-advocacy goes far beyond just titles and pay, in my opinion. All right. Does anybody have any questions right now before we kind of shift gears into entrepreneurial thinking?
going to say, feel free to toss those in the Q&A feature. We'll keep monitoring that as well as the chat. And what I will do too is just give folks the ability to speak, I think, as well. So folks want to unmute themselves, you're totally welcome to. So we'll let you guys do that as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to let us know. Otherwise, we'll turn it back over to Jennifer, but we'll give it a sec just for questions to come in. So
Perfect. I promise I'm not scary if you want to ask a question. Okay, while y'all are thinking, remember, it is completely okay to drop your questions in the Q&A or the chat, and I'm happy to address them that way if you're more comfortable speaking up that way. But let's shift gears now a little bit and talk about this idea of entrepreneurial thinking and why these two topics were brought together for this particular session. So entrepreneurial thinking, in my opinion, is part of my own personal philosophy. It is also part of the philosophy of NC State entrepreneurship. That entrepreneurial thinking can be applied in so many different ways. It's not always just about starting a business or starting a venture. Entrepreneurial thinking is a mindset that can impact anyone who wants to think more like an entrepreneur, and it can impact any job. Anybody who wants to apply this entrepreneurial mindset to their job within an existing organization. And some of the skill sets that come along with entrepreneurial thinking can really help support all of the stuff that we've been talking about. A lot of the skill sets that are involved in entrepreneurial thinking, you'll see represented in those NACCE career competencies that we talked about. And applying an entrepreneurial mindset to seeking out problems, identifying potential solutions, overcoming challenges. All of that goes into building a brand for yourself as an employee. And then that brand puts you in a stronger position to self-advocate throughout your career. So that's why we're going to talk for a few minutes about this world of entrepreneurial thinking. And I'm going to simplify it a lot for you. The entrepreneurial thinking process is really about a couple of different critical steps. One is identifying challenges that exist that need to be addressed. Once you've identified those challenges, you're going to dig in and become an expert on them. Really understand what's happening. What is the problem? Why does it need to be fixed? How is it impacting people? How is it impacting the organization? How is it impacting the company? You got to be really ready to advocate for this idea as well. Once you've become an expert on understanding what that problem is, then you start to transition and think about, okay, now that I really understand this, how do we go about solving it? What are things that we can do as an organization? Is it creating a new product? Is it creating a new system? Is it internal? Is it external? What does a potential solution look like? So it involves a lot of creative thinking at that stage. And then it ends with actually getting something that you can build and implement and grow. So those are some of the stages that we're going to quickly touch on. So identifying areas for improvement. Step one, constantly be on the lookout within your organization and within your industries, within everything that goes on within your job. Constantly be looking for things that could be done better and should be done better. Even if it's something that exists outside of your direct day-to-day activities, right? It might be in a different department. It might be with a process that you only interact with tangentially, but you have a really cool way that it could be improved. Always be on the lookout for things that could be done differently / better. Then once you've identified them, really start digging in deep. Understand the process. Start to break down what it is that is happening. Who is impacted? What areas of the organization are impacted? What's driving whatever this challenge is that you have identified? And honestly, within the organization, who cares about it? Who should care about it? Why should they care? There's a couple of different tools that I will suggest here to help you really think about understanding a problem in a very thorough manner. And I think that's an important part of this entrepreneurial thinking process. Just because you see something in one way through your original perspective doesn't mean that you have a good grasp of what's going on. So finding ways to step out of your own mind and see challenges from a lot of different perspectives will be helpful to you as you gain sort of this expertise knowledge on whatever problem it is that you've identified. So one way to go about that is to just take a step back and think about reframing the problem. So whatever challenge it is that you've identified, is there a different way to describe what the challenge is? Now I'll give you an example. Years and years ago, Alaska Airlines recognized that they had a challenge. And it was that everybody tended to arrive at the exact same time to get on flights. And in going to Alaska or in leaving Alaska, people tended to have a lot of luggage and a lot of baggage. And so they recognized that flights were taking off late because the process for getting people from check-in where the plane was loaded and taking off was taking too long. There were serious delays. So somebody at Alaska Airlines said, hey, this is a big problem. This is a challenge. We need to understand this better. But an important part of that understanding the problem was that they reframed what it was they were doing. Somebody said, well, are we really trying to create a new process to check in our airline passengers, or are we trying to redesign the entire customer experience process? And I understand that those two might sound similar, but when you start to really break them down, it's two very, very different processes. If you're only looking at what you can do as an airline, you've narrowed down what it is that you're thinking about. But if you take a step back and say, how do we redefine the entire customer experience? You've given yourself a lot more flexibility to be creative in what you're looking for and the type of research that you're doing. And so one of the ways that Alaska Airlines decided to shift their focus a little bit, they didn't say what other airlines experience the same problem. They said, hey, who else around the world deals with customer experiences? And who does it really well? Who can we learn from that takes a large number of people and stuff, arriving all at one time, needing to be processed thoroughly and efficiently and correctly, all the way up to the end of the customer experience? Now, all of a sudden, they have lots of different things to think about. And do you know who they went to and studied as part of this understanding the problem process? It wasn't all other airlines. It was places like Disney World or other amusement parks. It was concerts. It was anywhere that large numbers of people showed up all at one time on somewhat of a deadline, needing to be processed and wanting to have a good and efficient experience. And what they learned through that research had a significant impact on the eventual solutions that they tested out and put in place for Alaska Airlines, all because they were willing to reframe their problem. Another tool that I'll share with you is called the 5 Whys. I don't know if you've ever heard of this tool. It's a really simple one. I mean, it is exactly what the name implies. It's taking a challenge and asking why at least 5 different times to dig to the root of what's going on. So here's an example and how this can really change your perspective on what it is you need to be focusing on. So here's the challenge we're going to start off with. It's a very specific challenge. I received a bad review from my supervisor. Okay, that would be a challenge that most of us would want to investigate further, albeit a very, very narrowly defined challenge. But if we only think about a bad review and we start assuming we understand why it happened, we might end up all over the place and we may or may not ever get to the answer, the root cause of it. But if we ask why, we can dig deeper. So why did I receive a bad review from my supervisor? Well, I've been late and unprepared for our last 3 meetings. Why have I been late and unprepared to our last 3 meetings? I forgot to prepare and tried to rush through it right before the meeting started. Why did I forget and have to rush? Well, I forgot about it and didn't realize it till the very last minute. Why did I forget about it? Because I didn't write it on my to-do list. And why did I not write it on my to-do list? Because I don't have a good organization system. So when you think about it, What's the root problem that we need to be addressing here? Does it have anything to do with the review process? It doesn't. The challenge here that really needs to be highlighted is the organization system. So the whole theory behind this 5 whys is if we don't understand what's truly causing a challenge, how do we ever know if we're addressing the right things? And that's where the 5 whys techniques has been really, really helpful for me in my career. Now, I will say, don't stress yourself out and think it's only got to be 5, right? If you get to a viable answer by asking why 3 times, awesome. And if you need to do it 7 times, that's great too. You get to adapt these to your own needs. It's just a really great way of thinking about understanding problems. And really the key before you can transition into thinking about solutions is to make sure you've done a thorough job. Make sure you have done enough research that you can talk about, research that you can show specific data that is both valid and reliable to help you become an expert on this challenge. That is really the first part of the entrepreneurial thinking process. But once you've done that, then you get to transition into thinking about potential solutions. And I think thinking about potential solutions involves helping you change your perspective as well. Seeing problems through new eyes in terms of what ifs and could be's and possibilities instead of probabilities becomes really important. So I'd like to pull up an image that for me has always done a great job of reminding me why it is so important to change your perspectives. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you, and there's going to be an image. It's going to be kind of small, and I apologize for that. But I want you to think about what is it that what are you seeing? What is this a picture of? Does everybody have an idea of what is a picture of? Would anybody like to speak up about what they saw, what their first impressions were? I get people who are very quiet on this one sometimes because they're like, this has got to be a trick question. I don't want to answer. I want to wait for her to tell me what it's supposed to be. So here's what I get. A lot of people initially see a picture of a frog. Okay, so you can imagine if this image was hanging up on a wall somewhere as artwork and you were just to walk by, how many of you would walk by this image and think, okay, cool picture of a frog, and you would just keep going on throughout your day? Well, when we start to change perspectives and look deeper at what it is we're actually seeing, we realize that this is not actually a frog at all, that this is human beings, that this is actually 5 human beings with body paint on. And at this point, when I'm in a classroom face to face, I usually start to see people doing this number, trying to figure out what's going on. So if you can't see it, I hope you can see my pointer. There's a human here. There is a human here and mirrored over here. And there is another human curled up on either side. So 5 human beings. And for some reason, this image and other images like it have always kind of stuck in my head as those reminders that what I think I'm seeing at first glance might not always be the full and totally accurate picture. And so I need to keep trying to see it through new perspectives, keep digging into it and trying to understand what's going on before I'm ready to really think about how do I best solve this challenge. So as we're thinking about innovative solutions, remember, we're thinking about possibilities and options. We're not thinking about probabilities and the right answer. Okay. The entrepreneurial mindset says if we go out seeking the right answer, when we're thinking in terms of innovation, we limit our ability to be creative. Because often in the entrepreneurial thinking process, there is not going to be only one right answer. There's probably going to be a lot of answers that all could work. And then it's our job to be able to dig in and say, all right, we think this one's going to work the best, and here's why. But if it doesn't work, here are also other viable options that we could potentially try. And I think part of the entrepreneurial thinking process is getting comfortable with the fact that there might not be a lot of definitive answers. But by going through this process multiple times and building your brand as an entrepreneurial thinker, that will become part of what you can use to advocate for yourself. I have brought innovation. I've brought new perspectives. I have brought creative thinking. I have brought new ways of looking at the challenges that we face as an organization. All of those things can be brought into the conversation when you're advocating for yourself. And all of those skills tie directly back into those NACCE career competencies, those things that employers are really looking for in the people that they're bringing into their organizations. So one of the last things that I'm going to share with you is another image. Sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth between the screen share so much. I just hate leaving things on screen share and having you just look at a boring slide. So as we're thinking about innovative solutions, part of what we're doing is thinking about how do we redefine reality, okay? Again, this ties back into what I've said a couple of times now, what is possible, not always what is probable. So sometimes our best innovations are going to come from things that we have seen happen, maybe in other departments, maybe in other companies, maybe even in other industries completely unrelated to ours, that we can see, learn from, and say, okay, just because it worked that way somewhere else doesn't mean that I can't redefine how it works or why it works that way for my role, my organization, my company, my department, whatever it is. So a great example of that, this picture right here is an invention called the Edison electric pen. So years and years and years ago, Edison recognized that there was a big problem in the fields for people who wrote multiple document copies. So back then, you needed, let's say, 10 different copies of a real estate contract. Somebody had to hand write out 10 different copies of that same contract. So you can imagine the errors that occurred and inconsistencies from one copy to the next. And Edison got to thinking, what can I do to have an impact on this? And he created what you're looking at, and it was an electric pen. And the theory behind it, it's cool theory. Turns out it didn't work out so well in actual application. But it was a pen that when you wrote, it poked holes in the paper, and you could run ink over it, and the ink would go through the holes, and you could make as many copies of this document as you wanted. And it was motorized, it was electric, so as you wrote, it was constantly just poking holes. Now, here are some of the challenges with it. You can see it was bulky, it was heavy. People felt like they were tethered to this really short workspace. They couldn't move around a whole lot. It was clunky. You can see the motor on the top of the pen. It was really ergonomically unfriendly. And quite frankly, the process just didn't work out as well as he had hoped. So cool invention, wasn't a top seller as he had hoped it was going to be. However, somebody saw this invention and decided to redefine the reality of what type of solution it could be and how that solution could be applied. So there was, the way that I've read and heard the story is that there was an office supply company that was trying to sell some of these Edison electric pens. They weren't selling very well, but there was one set up in a store window. And this gentleman was walking down the street, saw it, and thought, okay, that looks cool. And so we started to investigate a little bit further. Now, this gentleman's name was Samuel O'Reilly, and I'm going to move our faces because I'm betting they're hiding the second picture for you. So Samuel O'Reilly saw this invention and thought, cool, what if I could apply that to my own craft? Now, Samuel O'Reilly happened to be a tattoo artist. And he was thinking, I wonder what my craft could look like if I could do it faster or with more detail, or if there was a better, more efficient way to apply my artwork to skin. And he thought, what if I could have an electric pen that did tattoos? And so we bought one. He took it apart, started really trying to learn how it worked, and he ended up creating the very first electric tattoo gun. all because he was willing to not be honed in on what something was supposed to do, but he took a step back, redefined reality, and said, well, let me think about what it could do. What could it be in another area? Then the very last part of this, so let's say you've identified a challenge, you've investigated, you've researched, you've learned, you have proposed an innovative solution, you found something that you think is going to work. The very last part, and it's going to be the part that I kind of brush through really quickly, but it's a really long, intense part. Your next steps are figuring out, how do you create a plan that makes sense for the idea and for the organization that's going to be impacted? How do you implement that plan? And how do you constantly refine and adapt it as you learn and as you grow? And that, in a very, very quick nutshell, is the entrepreneurial thinking process that can feed back into this idea of creating your own personal brand at work to help you be a stronger self-advocate for yourself in the workplace. And I will leave you, if any of you would like to get in touch with me or learn more about me or the work that I do, I will leave you with this. You can screenshot it, or you can go ahead with your phone and scan the QR code. This QR code will take you to more information about me. This QR code will take you to more information about NC State entrepreneurship. And if you need it again, just let me know, I can pull it back up. But thank you for letting me hang out with you today and work with you. I'm happy to address questions if you have any.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for all of that. I think that was amazing. I know I learned a lot myself and took some good notes. So just thank you for that. But yeah, want to offer up the opportunity for questions. If anybody has anything, feel free to unmute yourself or throw them in the chat or Q&A, and we can answer them that way too. And we'll see if anything comes in there. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording just because I think we're good there.